It happened on the kind of rainy autumn morning that made the world feel heavier than usual. Gray clouds hung low over the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, mirroring the weight in Sarah Mitchell's heart as her wheelchair slowly rolled down the military hospital corridor. The wheels squeaked slightly as she moved, an echo of a shattered life. Just 8 months ago, Sarah was the brightest star of the Chicago Ballet Company, the youngest dancer in history to lead in Swan Lake at the Kennedy Center. But one rainy night, a truck that lost control and the screech of brakes had stolen everything. Her spine was damaged beyond repair, or so the doctor said. She hadn't walked since then. The rain pelted against the hospital windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the mechanical beeps of medical equipment. Sarah Mitchell sat motionless in her wheelchair, her once powerful dancer's legs now useless beneath a blanket. Her fingers, still elegant and strong, gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white. She was leaving Walter Reed National Military Medical Center today, but there was no joy in the departure. Just another transfer. Another disappointment waiting to happen. Behind her stood her father, Robert Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Defense Systems. At 58, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", with broad shoulders and silver-streaked dark hair that spoke of authority rather than age. His tailored suit couldn't hide the military bearing from his younger years. His face, weathered by decades of boardroom battles and classified Pentagon meetings, now carried a new line for every day his daughter had been in that wheelchair. "The car is ready, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle in a way that only she ever heard. To the rest of the world, Robert Mitchell was steel and granite. "Dr. Patel has signed all the discharge papers." Sarah didn't respond. She'd stopped responding to most things months ago. What was there to say? The top neurologists in the country had all delivered the same verdict: permanent paralysis from the waist down. The nerves were too damaged, the swelling too severe, the timing of the initial surgery too delayed. A young nurse approached with the last of Sarah's medications. "Miss Mitchell, I have your—" "I'll take those," Robert interrupted, extending his hand. The nurse, recognizing the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed, handed over the paper bag without another word. As they moved down the corridor, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. She barely recognized herself anymore. Her once vibrant, auburn hair hung limp around a face that had grown gaunt. At 23, she looked both younger in her vulnerability and older in her despair. 8 months ago, she had been soaring across stages, her body an instrument of precision and grace. Now she couldn't even feel the seat beneath her. The memories came unbidden, as they always did. The thunderous applause at Kennedy Center last November. The standing ovation led by the Secretary of State himself. The critic from the New York Times calling her the most promising American ballerina of her generation. The contract offers from companies in London and Paris, all evaporated on a rain-slicked road when a semi-truck jackknifed across 3 lanes. The car waiting outside was not the usual sleek town car, but a specially modified Suburban with a wheelchair lift. Another reminder of her new reality. Robert's security team moved with practiced efficiency, shielding her from the light rain as she was transferred into the vehicle. She caught a glimpse of her father slipping the lead security man a folded newspaper. The headlines were partially visible: "Mitchell Defense Stock Falls Amid CEO's Extended Absence." "Ignore it," she said, the first words she'd spoken all day. "Go back to the office. I can handle a car ride with just the driver." Robert settled into the seat beside her. "The board can wait. They've been waiting for 8 months. Another few weeks won't kill them." Sarah turned away, staring out at the Maryland countryside as it gave way to the Virginia suburbs. She knew what this was costing him, not just money, though there had been plenty of that. Private nurses, experimental treatments, consultations with specialists flown in from Switzerland, Japan, and Israel. Robert Mitchell had leveraged his considerable influence to get her into clinical trials not open to the public. He had converted an entire wing of their Alexandria mansion into a rehabilitation facility with equipment that many hospitals couldn't afford. None of it had worked. The car eventually turned onto the private road leading to their estate. The Mitchell property sat on 10 acres overlooking the Potomac, a sprawling Georgian colonial that had once been featured in Architectural Digest. Sarah had loved this house growing up. Now she saw it only as an elegant prison. For days, then weeks, the pattern remained the same. Mornings filled with physical therapy sessions that seemed pointless. Afternoons of sitting by the window sketching occasionally or reading books she couldn't focus on. Evenings of picking at meals before retiring early to a bed where sleep rarely came easily. Robert would sit with her when he could, their conversations growing shorter as her responses became more mechanical. The nights were the worst. Alone in the dark, Sarah would remember the feel of her body in motion, the power of a grand jeté, the perfect balance of an arabesque, the controlled spin of a fouette. Sometimes she dreamed she was dancing again, only to wake and feel the dead weight of her legs. Those were the mornings her father would find her with red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained pillows. December came with its Christmas decorations that felt like mockery. January brought snow that she could only watch from windows. February passed in a blur of gray skies and canceled appointments with specialists who had run out of options. By March, Robert had stopped mentioning new treatments. But one evening, as Sarah sat in the library pretending to read, she noticed something different in his demeanor when he entered the room. There was a tension in his shoulders, but also something else, a faint glimmer of what might have been hope. "I need to discuss something with you," he said, taking the chair opposite her. He placed a folder on the table between them. "I've been researching alternatives." Sarah didn't reach for the folder. "We've been through every alternative." "Not this one." Robert opened the folder himself, revealing photographs of a sprawling facility nestled in the mountains. "It's called Eagle's Nest Recovery Center. It's in the Blue Ridge Mountains about 3 hours from here." "Another rehab center," Sarah said flatly. "What makes this one different from the last five?" "Their approach." Robert turned a page, revealing more images: gardens, woodland paths, rustic buildings that looked more like a mountain retreat than a medical facility. They combined conventional therapy with less conventional methods. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What, like crystal healing miracle water from mountain springs?" "Nothing like that," Robert said with surprising patience. "Their program is based on neuroplasticity research, but they incorporate elements of psychological recovery that most facilities overlook. They've had success with patients who showed no improvement elsewhere." "And how much is this miracle cure going to kid on?" Sarah knew the question was unfair even as she asked it. Money had never been the issue. "It's not about the cost," Robert said quietly. "It's about finding the right place for you right now. I've spoken with Dr. Harmon. He thinks the change of environment alone might be beneficial." Sarah turned back to the window, watching the first buds of spring struggling against the lingering cold. "So you're sending me away?" "I'm trying to help you. By shipping me off to some mountain retreat when nothing else has worked." She hadn't raised her voice in months, but now it cracked with emotion. "Why not just accept what every doctor has told us? This," she gestured violently at her legs, "is permanent." Robert leaned forward, his face carved with determination. "Because I know my daughter. The Sarah Mitchell I raised would never give up on anything without a fight. And I'm not about to give up on her either." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah turned away, but not before Robert saw the flicker of something cross her face, the first spark he'd seen in months. "1 month," he said softly. "Give it 1 month. If you don't see any improvement, any at all, we'll try something else." 3 days later, they were on the road to Blue Ridge. The drive took them west from the wealthy suburbs of Northern Virginia into increasingly rural landscapes. As they climbed into the mountains, cell reception became spotty, then non-existent. The modern world seemed to fall away with each mile. Eagle's Nest Recovery Center appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering pine trees. The main structure was larger than Sarah had expected, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. Smaller cabins dotted the property, connected by stone pathways. It looked more like an upscale summer camp than a medical facility. As their car pulled up to the entrance, Sarah noticed something strange about the architecture beneath the rustic exterior. There was a solidity to the main building that seemed at odds with its surroundings. The foundations were unusually thick, the windows reinforced in a way that spoke of function over form. A woman in her 50s emerged from the main doors. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her clothing casual but professional khaki pants and a blue button-down beneath a light jacket with the Eagle's Nest logo. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, extending her hand to Robert as he exited the car. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, director of Eagle's Nest. We spoke on the phone." She turned to Sarah as the driver deployed the wheelchair lift. "And you must be Sarah. Welcome to Eagle's Nest." Sarah nodded without speaking. She had perfected the art of acknowledging people without engaging them. The interior of the main building continued the theme of rustic luxury polished hardwood floors, exposed beams, comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings. But again, Sarah noticed odd details, the unusual thickness of the interior walls, the slight elevation change between sections of the building doors that seemed unnecessarily heavy. Eagle's Nest was established 15 years ago, Dr. Blackwood explained as she led them through the facility. Before that, this property was privately owned. We've maintained much of the original structure while adapting it to our needs. They were shown to Sarah's accommodations, a private cabin near a small lake equipped with accessible features that somehow managed not to look medical. The space was warm and inviting with large windows, offering views of the water and mountains beyond. That evening, Sarah skipped dinner in the main hall, claiming fatigue from the journey. The truth was simpler. She couldn't bear the thought of more pitying glances, more forced conversations, more pretending that hope still existed. As twilight deepened into night, she wheeled herself onto the small deck attached to her cabin. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine, and something else, a metallic tang, that reminded her of approaching storms. The sky above was clear, however, stars emerging in numbers she never saw in Alexandria. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something other than numbness or despair. It wasn't hope, she was far from that, but perhaps a moment of peace in the quiet of the mountains. She sat there until the cold drove her inside, watching the stars and listening to the distant calls of night birds. The next morning brought the familiar routine of assessments, doctors measuring her responses, testing reflexes that didn't exist, documenting the exact parameters of her paralysis. Sarah submitted to their examinations with practiced detachment. She had been through this process so many times that she could predict the questions before they were asked. Dr. Blackwood observed from a distance, making notes on a tablet. Unlike the other medical professionals Sarah had encountered, she didn't offer platitudes or forced optimism. There was something refreshingly honest in her clinical approach. "Your previous treatments have been extensive," she noted after the assessments were complete. "You've had access to cutting-edge therapies that most patients never see." "My father is very determined," Sarah replied. "And you," Dr. Blackwood asked, looking up from her tablet, "what are you determined to do?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Most doctors spoke about her recovery as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if positive thinking alone could regenerate severed nerve pathways. "I'm determined to avoid false hope," she finally said. "I've had enough disappointment to last a lifetime." Dr. Blackwood nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "Well, let's start with realistic expectations then. Our program is different from what you've experienced before. We don't promise miracles. What we offer is a path sometimes to physical recovery, sometimes to a different kind of healing." By evening, exhaustion had settled into her bones. After another meal taken alone in her cabin, she found herself on the deck again, watching the dying light paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. A movement at the edge of the woods caught her attention. A small figure emerged from between the trees, a boy, no more than 8 years old, with a mop of brown hair and a determined stride. He was carrying something in his arms, moving with the intense focus unique to children on a mission. Sarah watched as he approached one of the nearby cabins, climbing the steps with careful movements to avoid dropping his burden. When the cabin door opened, she caught a glimpse of a tall man, broad-shouldered and solid, bending down to meet the boy at eye level. There was something in that simple gesture, the way the man gave the child his complete attention, that made Sarah look away, feeling like an intruder on a private moment. The following days fell into a pattern: mornings of physical therapy that left her exhausted, afternoons of occupational therapy that felt pointless. What occupation could a paralyzed dancer hope for? Evenings alone, watching the mountains change with the fading light. Robert visited during therapy sessions, his presence both comforting and suffocating. They rarely spoke beyond pleasantries, the gulf between them widening despite his efforts to bridge it. On the fourth day, Dr. Blackwood informed them that she had arranged for Sarah to work with a specialist, someone not officially on staff, but who volunteered at Eagle's Nest part-time. "His methods are unconventional but effective with certain patients," she explained. "I want the best for my daughter," Robert said firmly. "Conventional or not, doesn't matter if it works." Later, when Robert had left to make calls in an area with better reception, Sarah confronted Dr. Blackwood. "I'm not a lab rat for experimental treatments," she said bluntly, "and I'm capable of making my own decisions." "Of course you are, doctor." Blackwood replied unruffled. Which is why I'm telling you directly, this specialist has helped patients that everyone else had written off. But his methods require full commitment from the patient. If you're not interested, we won't proceed. Something in the doctor's straightforward manner made Sarah pause. Who is this miracle worker? Jack Thompson, former military doctor. He served as a combat medic during the Gulf War before completing his medical training. He has an unusual approach to neural recovery, and he just happens to volunteer at this remote facility. Dr. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. Jack has his reasons for preferring places off the beaten path. He'll explain if you agree to work with him. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself intrigued. Fine, I'll meet him. The next morning, Sarah decided to skip breakfast in the main hall again, preferring the solitude of her cabin. As she sat on the deck with a cup of cooling coffee, she noticed movement on the path leading to the lake. The same boy she had seen before was walking alone, carrying what looked like a sketchbook. Without conscious decision, Sarah found herself wheeling down the ramp that connected her deck to the path. The boy noticed her approach and stopped watching her with open curiosity rather than the awkward pity she had grown accustomed to seeing. Hi, he said simply when she drew near. Hello, Sarah replied, suddenly unsure why she had approached him. The boy studied her wheelchair with frank interest. Is that hard to drive? The question asked without pretense startled a small laugh from Sarah, the first and longer than she could remember. Not hard, just different. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. I'm Noah, he said, extending a small hand with surprising formality. Sarah, she replied, shaking his hand. My dad says you're Shirley Selrum. Noah continued, catching her off guard with his directness. Does he? Sarah asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Noah nodded again. He says sometimes sad people just need a different kind of help. He looked at her with solemn eyes. He helped me when my mom went to heaven. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, left Sarah momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Noah pointed toward a nearby greenhouse she hadn't noticed before. That's where Dad works sometimes. He helps plants grow, and he helps people too. In the distance, Sarah could see the figure of a man moving among rows of greenery. He can help you, Noah added with a child's certainty. Something about the boy's confident assertion irritated Sarah. Not everything can be fixed, she said more sharply than she had intended. Noah considered this with surprising seriousness. Dad says things don't always need to be fixed. Sometimes they just need to be understood. He held up his sketchbook. I'm going to draw the lake. Do you want to come? The invitation offered so casually caught Sarah by surprise. It had been months since anyone had asked her to do something simply for enjoyment. Her therapist invited her to exercises. Her father invited her to try new treatments. This child was just inviting her to sit by a lake. Maybe another time, she found herself saying, not quite a rejection. Later that day, as she sat alone near the edge of the property, she noticed the man from the greenhouse walking toward her. He moved with the confident stride of someone completely at home, in his body dressed in worn jeans and a navy blue t-shirt that had seen better days. As he drew closer, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, mid-40s perhaps, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of laughter rather than age. His hair was dark brown with hints of early gray at the temples, cut short in a style that suggested practicality over fashion. He stopped a respectful distance away. Mind if I join you? His voice was deep with a slight southern accent that softened the edges of his words. Sarah shrugged, neither welcoming nor rejecting the company. He sat on a nearby bench, surveying the view of the mountains with obvious appreciation. For several minutes, he said nothing, seemingly content with the silence. It was this lack of forced conversation that finally prompted Sarah to speak. Are you Noah's father? He turned to her with a smile that transformed his weathered face. I am, Jack Thompson. He didn't extend his hand, sensing perhaps that she preferred her space. I see you've met my boy. This morning, Sarah confirmed, he was going to draw the lake. Jack nodded. He's got his mother's eye for beauty. There was no sorrow in his voice as he mentioned his late wife, just a quiet acknowledgement of fact. He said you work with plants, Sarah said, nodding toward the greenhouse. Among other things. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wildflower purple petals with a yellow center. He offered it to her with a simple gesture. You don't have to smile, he said quietly, but maybe this will make it today 1% better. Sarah looked at the flower, then at Jack. There was no expectation in his expression, no demand for gratitude or response, just an offering given freely. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the small bloom. Noah also said you help people, she said, twirling the flower between her fingers. I try. Jack leaned back, his posture relaxed but attentive, though sometimes helping doesn't look the way people expect it to. What does that mean? It means healing isn't always about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about finding a new way forward. He glanced at her wheelchair without awkwardness. I understand you've had the best medical care available. My father is very determined, Sarah replied. Jack nodded thoughtfully. Determination has its place. So does acceptance. The trick is knowing which one serves you better at any given moment. The conversation was unlike any Sarah had experienced since her accident. Jack spoke to her without the careful phrasing people usually employed around her, yet there was nothing insensitive in his directness. When he finally stood to leave, he did so without the usual platitudes about seeing her soon or wishing her well. Noah's usually at the lake around 9, he said simply, if you ever feel like company. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah dreamed not of dancing, but of mountains and wildflowers, in a lake reflecting perfect blue sky. She woke feeling strangely restless, a sensation so unfamiliar, it took her moments to identify it as something other than despair. Robert visited her cabin for breakfast, bringing news that he would need to return to Alexandria for a few days. The board is pushing for decisions I can't make remotely, he explained, watching her reaction carefully. I can postpone if you need me to stay. I'll be fine, Sarah assured him, surprised to find she meant it. The prospect of solitude at Eagle's Nest didn't fill her with the dread she might have expected. Dr. Blackwood mentioned you agreed to work with this specialist, Thompson, Robert said. What do you know about him? Not much, Sarah admitted. He seems different from the other doctors. Robert frowned slightly. Different how I've had my security team run a background check, but information is limited. Former military doctor, served with distinction, then left the mainstream medical community after his wife's death. Sarah felt a flicker of irritation at the thought of Jack being investigated like a potential security threat. He's Noah's father. He works with plants. That's all I know. I just want to be sure he's qualified, Robert said, his protective instincts evident. Your treatment needs to be guided by expertise, not some mountain man's folk remedies. I think 8 months of expertise has earned me the right to try something different. Sarah replied, a hint of her old spirit showing through. Besides, I thought you were the one who wanted me to come here. After Robert left, promising to return in 3 days, Sarah found herself wheeling toward the lake without conscious decision. It was just past 9, and sure enough, Noah was there, perched on a large rock with his sketchbook open on his lap. You came, he exclaimed when he spotted her, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. I did, Sarah agreed, surprised by the boy's enthusiasm. What are you drawing today? Noah held up his sketchbook, revealing a surprisingly skilled sketch of a hawk in flight. I saw him hunting yesterday, he explained, pointing to the sky. Dad says if you watch carefully enough, nature will tell you all its secrets. They sat in companionable silence for a while, Noah continuing his drawing, while Sarah watched the ripples on the lake's surface. There was something peaceful about the boy's presence, no expectations, no pressure, just simple companionship. Do you miss dancing? Noah asked suddenly, looking up from his sketchbook. The question caught Sarah off guard. How did you know I was a dancer? Dad told me, Noah replied simply. He said you used to fly across stages like you had wings. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, grief for what she had lost, but also a strange warmth at the thought that someone had described her dancing that way. Yes, she finally answered. I miss it more than anything. Noah nodded thoughtfully. I miss my mom more than anything, but Dad says just because something's gone doesn't mean it wasn't real. He returned to his drawing, adding delicate details to the hawk's wings. Do you still hear the music in your head? All the time. Sarah admitted, the confession coming easier to this child than it would have to any adult. Then maybe you're still a dancer. Noah suggested, his logic both childish and profound. Just in a different way now. Before Sarah could respond, she noticed Jack approaching from the direction of the main building. He carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, his stride easy and unhurried. When he spotted them, a smile creased his face. "I see you two have found each other again," he said, dropping his bag on the ground and sitting on a nearby log. "Sarah came to see my drawings," Noah explained proudly. "Did she now?" Jack glanced at Sarah with warm eyes. "You're braver than most. He usually talks about birds for hours once he gets started." "Hawks today?" Sarah confirmed with the ghost of a smile. Jack pulled a small paper-wrapped package from his bag. "Breakfast," he offered, extending it toward Sarah. "Mrs. Chambers' blueberry muffins are worth breaking any diet for." The simple offer made without ceremony felt like the most normal interaction Sarah had experienced in months. She accepted the muffin, surprised by her own appetite as she took a bite. "What else is in the mysterious bag?" she asked, nodding toward Jack's canvas carry-all. "Seed packets, gardening tools, a book on native medicinal plants." Jack shrugged, arming. "I'm helping restore the original gardens here. They were something special back in the day." "What was this place?" Sarah asked. "Before it was Eagle's Nest, I mean." "The buildings don't quite fit the surroundings." A shadow seemed to pass over Jack's face so quickly Sarah thought she might have imagined it. "Government property originally," he said after a slight pause. "Built in the early 60s as some kind of research station. It was abandoned for years before Dr. Blackwood converted it." "Research for what?" Jack hesitated, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "That's a question with a complicated answer. One better saved for another day." He stood brushing crumbs from his jeans. "I should get to the greenhouse. Those seedlings won't transplant themselves." As Noah gathered his things, Jack turned back to Sarah. "Dr. Blackwood tells me you have agreed to try working with me," he said, his tone shifting subtly to something more professional. Sarah nodded, suddenly unsure of her decision in the clear light of day. "Tomorrow morning, then, 9 o'clock at cabin 7. Jack shouldered his bag again. "Wear comfortable clothes. Nothing fancy." "What exactly will we be doing?" Sarah asked, a hint of her old wariness returning. Jack considered her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Getting acquainted," he finally said. "Not with me, with yourself." That afternoon, unable to settle to her usual routine of staring out windows, Sarah explored more of the Eagle's Nest grounds. The facility was larger than she had initially realized, with paths winding through woods and gardens, some wheelchair accessible, and others clearly not meant for her. As she navigated the property, she found herself drawn to a section that seemed older than the rest. A stone building with narrow windows and a heavy wooden door. The door was locked, but through the windows she could see what looked like storage space shelves lined with boxes, furniture draped in protective covers. Yet something about the building nagged at her attention. The construction was different, utilitarian rather than aesthetic, with unusually thick walls and reinforced corners. "That area is off limits to patients," a voice said behind her, causing her to start. Dr. Blackwood stood a few yards away, her expression neutral, but her posture alert. "Safety concerns with the older structures." "What was it used for?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. "Storage mostly these days," Dr. Blackwood replied smoothly. "The original property had several outbuildings. We've repurposed what we could and sealed off the rest." Sarah gestured toward the main complex. "Jack Thompson mentioned this was some kind of government research station." Something flickered in Dr. Blackwood's eyes, caution perhaps. "That's correct. Environmental research, I believe. The location was ideal for studying mountain ecosystems undisturbed by development." The explanation sounded reasonable, yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was incomplete. Before she could press further, Dr. Blackwood changed the subject. "I understand you'll be working with Jack starting tomorrow," she said. "He has an unusual approach, but I've seen remarkable results with his patients." "What exactly does he do?" Sarah asked, wheeling away from the stone building with reluctance. "Everyone keeps talking about his methods without explaining what they are." "Jack believes in treating the whole person, not just the physical symptoms," Dr. Blackwood explained as they moved along the path. "His background gives him a unique perspective on trauma and recovery." "His military service, you mean?" Dr. Blackwood nodded. "Jack served as a combat medic in the Gulf War. He has firsthand experience with catastrophic injuries and their psychological impacts." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "He also has a personal understanding of loss and adaptation." Sarah thought of Noah, of the absent mother he spoke of so matter-of-factly. His wife, she said quietly. Yes, car accident 5 years ago. Jack was driving. Dr. Blackwood's voice softened. He couldn't save her despite his medical training. It changed his approach to healing, made him look beyond conventional methods. The parallels to her own situation were not lost on Sarah. And now he's going to work his magic on me, she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Jack doesn't believe in magic, Dr. Blackwood replied with unexpected sharpness. He believes in science that hasn't been fully explored yet. He believes in the body's capacity to heal itself given the right circumstances. She stopped turning to face Sarah directly, and he believes that healing starts in the mind, not the body. The next morning dawned with a crystalline clarity unique to mountain elevations. Sarah woke earlier than usual, her sleep disturbed by dreams she couldn't quite remember. Fragments of images that dissolved like mist when she tried to focus on them. The strange restlessness that had been growing since her arrival at Eagle's Nest propelled her through her morning routine with unusual energy. By 8:30, she was wheeling along the path toward Cabin 7, the morning sun warming her face. The facility was quiet, most patients still at breakfast in the main hall. Birds called from the surrounding forest, their songs punctuated by the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. As she approached the cabin, Sarah noticed details she had missed the day before. Unlike the other buildings, Cabin 7 sat slightly apart, nestled against the tree line as if seeking privacy. The structure itself was older, its weathered logs speaking of decades rather than years. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, suggesting a fire despite the mild spring morning. She hesitated at the bottom of the ramp, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What did she expect from this unconventional doctor, with his talk of acceptance and new paths forward? Before she could reconsider, the door opened, and Jack stood framed in the entrance. Right on time, he said, his voice carrying in the clear mountain air. He wore simple clothing again, cargo pants and a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. Come on in. The fire's just getting going. The interior of the cabin was warm and smelled of cedar and wood smoke. The open floor plan allowed Sarah to see everything at once, the small kitchenette in one corner, the sleeping area partitioned by a half-wall, the central living space dominated by a stone fireplace where flames danced over seasoned logs. Bookshelves lined every available wall, filled with an eclectic mix of medical texts, wilderness survival guides, and what appeared to be vintage military manuals. Coffee, Jack offered, already moving toward the kitchenette. Yes, thank you. Sarah wheeled further into the room, drawn to the warmth of the fire. She noticed a collection of photographs on the mantel, Jack in military uniform, much younger but with the same steady gaze. A beautiful, dark-haired woman holding a violin, her smile radiant. Noah as a toddler balanced on the hood of an old Jeep. My wife Rebecca, Jack said, noticing her attention as he returned with 2 steaming mugs. She was a concert violinist before Noah came along. Sarah accepted the coffee, unsure how to respond. Most people avoided mentioning deceased loved ones around her, as if tragedy might be contagious. She's beautiful, she said finally, the simple truth easier than platitudes. Jack nodded, his expression reflective rather than pained. She was, inside and out. He settled into a chair near the fire opposite Sarah's wheelchair. Before we start, I want to make something clear. I'm not here to fix you, Sarah. The bluntness of the statement caught her off guard. Then what exactly are you here to do? To help you remember who you are beyond what's happened to you. Jack leaned forward, his eyes intent. Your medical file tells me about your injury. It doesn't tell me about Sarah Mitchell. I'm not sure I know who that is anymore. She admitted the confession easier in the warm privacy of the cabin. That's where we start then. Jack set his mug aside and reached for a worn leather journal on the side table. This was Rebecca's. After her accident, I found it helped to remember the whole story, not just how it ended. Sarah took the journal hesitantly. You want me to read about your wife? No, Jack said with a small smile. I want you to write about Sarah, who she was before, who she might be now. I'm not much of a writer. This isn't about writing, it's about remembering. Jack stood, moving to one of the bookshelves. Before a soldier can heal from combat trauma, they have to reconnect with who they were before the war. Your body has experienced a different kind of trauma, but the principle is the same. He returned with a small wooden box, opening it to reveal an eclectic collection of items: a small piece of pink satin ribbon, a worn ballet slipper keychain, a program from the Kennedy Center with Sarah's name prominently featured. "How did you get these?" she asked, recognizing items from her own belongings. "Your father brought them when he visited yesterday. Said they might help." Jack placed the box on the table between them. "Physical anchors to who you were." For the next hour, Jack guided her through an unconventional therapy session. There were no attempts to manipulate her legs, no discussions of nerve pathways or surgical options. Instead, he had her handle each item from the box, describing the memories they evoked. Her first pair of point shoes the moment she learned she'd been selected for the Kennedy Center performance. The feeling of standing in the wings before stepping into the spotlight. "Now close your eyes," Jack instructed. "Feel the weight of that memory in your body. Where does it live?" Sarah followed his directions, surprised to find herself fully engaged. "In my chest," she said after a moment. "And my arms." "Not in your legs." "No." The realization startled her. "That's strange, isn't it? The memory of dancing but not feeling it in my legs." "Not strange at all." Jack's voice was steady, guiding without pushing. "The essence of what dancing gave you, the joy, the expression, the connection, those things live in places your injury hasn't touched." By the end of the session, Sarah felt emotionally drained but oddly lighter, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. Jack closed the wooden box gently. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "In the meantime, I want you to use Rebecca's journal. Write whatever comes. No structure, no purpose, just words on a page." As Sarah prepared to leave, a framed document on the far wall caught her attention, a military commendation with Jack's name and a date from the Gulf War. The citation mentioned extraordinary life-saving measures under enemy fire and was signed by a General Franklin Reynolds. "You were decorated," she observed. Jack glanced at the framed paper with a hint of discomfort. "For doing my job," he said simply. "Nothing special about saving lives when that's what you're trained for." "Did you know my father during the war?" Sarah asked, remembering that Robert had also served, though he rarely spoke of it. Something flickered across Jack's face, too quick to interpret. "The military's a big place," he said after a slight pause. "Lots of paths that never cross." The non-answer registered, but Sarah didn't press. At the door, Jack handed her a small paper bag. "Lunch," he explained. "Mrs. Chambers' chicken salad sandwiches. Noah swears they're better than anything in 5 counties." The casual kindness offered without fanfare left Sarah momentarily speechless. She accepted the bag with a nod of thanks, unsure how to respond to generosity that expected nothing in return. Outside, the day had warmed considerably, sunlight filtering through the pine canopy to create dappled patterns on the path. Instead of returning to her cabin, Sarah found herself drawn to the lake where she had met Noah. The peaceful setting seemed ideal for attempting Jack's journal assignment. The lake was deserted, its surface a perfect mirror of the sky above. Sarah positioned her wheelchair in a patch of sunlight and opened Rebecca Thompson's journal. The first few pages contained writing, elegant script, detailing concert preparations and early impressions of motherhood, but most of the book remained blank, lives unlived and thoughts unrecorded. Sarah turned to a fresh page and hesitated, pen hovering above the cream-colored paper. What was there to say? How could she capture the before and after of her life, divided by a single moment on a rain-slicked road? Finally, she began simply, "Before." Words came slowly at first, then with increasing fluidity. She wrote about her first ballet lesson at age 4, the discipline that had shaped her youth, the moment she realized dance was not just something she did, but something she was. She described the physical sensations of movement, the burn in her muscles during a difficult sequence, the weightlessness of a perfect leap, the centered calm of a held arabesque. So absorbed was she in the task that she didn't notice the approach of footsteps until a shadow fell across the page. "You write small," Noah observed, peering over her shoulder, "like ants marching." Sarah closed the journal instinctively, then felt foolish for the protective gesture. "I didn't hear you coming." "Dad says I'm quiet as a fox." Noah settled cross-legged on the ground beside her wheelchair, apparently taking her presence as invitation enough. He had his sketchbook again, along with a tin of colored pencils. "Are you writing a story, sort of?" Sarah replied, finding it easier to talk to this forthright child than to most adults. "Your dad asked me to write about who I used to be." Noah nodded sagely. He made me do that too after Mom died. I drew pictures instead. Dad said that was okay. Sarah glanced at the boy's sketchbook. May I see? Noah flipped through the pages, stopping at a drawing of a woman with long, dark hair playing what appeared to be a violin. The image was created with a child's hand, but showed remarkable attention to detail. The curve of the woman's smile, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the tilt of her head as she listened to music only she could hear. That's my mom, Noah said simply. Dad says if I keep drawing her, I'll never forget what she looked like. Sarah studied the image, struck by the resemblance to the photograph she had seen on Jack's mantel. You've captured her beautifully. Noah beamed at the praise, then flipped to a blank page and began a new sketch, his small fingers moving with surprising dexterity. They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the scratching of Noah's pencil and the occasional call of birds from the surrounding forest. Dad says you're going to get better, Noah remarked, after several minutes not looking up from his drawing. Sarah felt a familiar defensiveness rising. Did he say how? Nope. Noah continued sketching unconcerned. But Dad doesn't lie, not even about hard things. The simple faith in his father's words gave Sarah pause. Before she could respond, a movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. Dr. Blackwood was walking quickly along a path that led away from the main complex, heading toward the restricted area Sarah had noticed the day before. The doctor carried what looked like a metal case, her manner suggesting urgency. Noah, what's in that old stone building? Sarah asked, nodding toward the direction Dr. Blackwood had taken. Noah glanced up, his expression suddenly guarded. We're not supposed to go there, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Dad says it's dangerous. Dangerous how? The boy shrugged, returning to his drawing with studied concentration. Don't know, just dangerous. Sarah watched as Dr. Blackwood disappeared around a bend in the path. The doctor's furtive behavior had sparked something in her, curiosity, yes, but also a vague sense of unease. What was in that building that required such secrecy? Have you ever been inside? She pressed. Noah shook his head vigorously. No way. That's where the bad dreams come from. Bad dreams? The ones that make Dad wake up shouting sometimes. Noah's pencil stilled, his expression troubled. He thinks I don't hear, but I do. Before Sarah could ask more, Noah abruptly changed the subject, pointing to a formation of clouds overhead. That one looks like a dragon, see, with fire coming out. Sarah allowed the diversion, recognizing the boy's reluctance to continue the previous conversation. They spent the next hour cloud watching and sketching Noah's chatter, filling the space between them with observations about wildlife and stories of his adventures exploring the grounds with Jack. When noon approached, Noah gathered his things. I have to go. Mrs. Chambers is teaching me fractions after lunch. He made a face that eloquently expressed his feelings about mathematics. Will you be here tomorrow? I think so, Sarah replied, surprised to find herself looking forward to the prospect. Noah grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. Good, I'm going to draw you a surprise. With that, he dashed off along the path toward the main building, energy radiating from his small frame. Sarah watched him go, struck by how easily the boy had slipped past her defenses. There was something about Noah's direct approach to life, his acceptance of both joy and sorrow as natural parts of existence, that made her own emotional walls seem suddenly flimsy and unnecessary. She turned back to Rebecca's journal, reading over what she had written. The words seemed to belong to someone else, a girl who had lived in her body before the accident, whose identity had been so thoroughly defined by movement that its absence had left her unmoored. Who was she now, if not a dancer? The question followed her back to her cabin, where she spent the afternoon alternating between writing in the journal and staring out at the mountains, lost in thought. As evening approached, she made the unusual decision to join the other patients for dinner in the main hall, her first time doing so since arriving at Eagle's Nest. The dining area was designed to feel like an upscale lodge with exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace, and long wooden tables that encouraged communal eating. Sarah positioned her wheelchair at the end of a table occupied by 3 other patients, an older man with what appeared to be a stroke-affected left side, a middle-aged woman with forearm crutches, and a young man whose missing leg was evident in the empty space beneath his khakis. Conversation was minimal. At first, each person focused on their meal. Then the young man, who introduced himself as Marcus, mentioned he had seen Sarah with the miracle worker's kid. "You've been working with Thompson," he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and something harder to define. "Just started," Sarah replied, suddenly wary. Marcus nodded, exchanging glances with the woman beside him. "Figured it was only a matter of time. Mitchell's daughter and all." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, bristling at the implication in his tone. "Just that your dad's got pull." Marcus shrugged, but his eyes remained watchful. "Word is he and Blackwood go way back." "I wouldn't know," Sarah said coolly. "My father doesn't discuss his business connections with me." The older man across the table cleared his throat. "Don't mind Marcus," he said, his speech slightly slurred from his stroke. "He's just sore because Thompson won't take him as a patient." "Not sore," Marcus corrected. "Curious. Guy shows up out of nowhere, works with a select few patients, has access to restricted areas of the facility that even Dr. Blackwood's senior staff can't enter." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Don't you find that a little strange?" The middle-aged woman Jean she had called herself rolled her eyes. "Here we go with the conspiracy theories again." Marcus ignored her. "All I'm saying is there's more going on here than physical therapy and nature walks. This place has history, military history." "It was a research facility," Sarah said, remembering Jack's brief explanation. "Environmental studies or something." Marcus snorted. "That's the official line. But those buildings weren't designed for studying squirrels and watersheds. The infrastructure, the reinforcements, this place was built to withstand something." "Like what?" Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation despite her initial reservations. "Nuclear fallout maybe, or worse." Marcus pushed his plate away, leaning closer. "My grandfather was stationed at a place like this in the 60s. Classified research into chemical and biological agents. Places the government could deny if things went wrong." Jean sighed dramatically. "And here I thought the fresh mountain air might clear out some of that paranoia, Marcus." "Call it what you want," Marcus replied, unperturbed. "But I've seen Thompson and Blackwood entering that old stone building after hours. Whatever they're doing, it's not standard rehab." Sarah thought of Dr. Blackwood's furtive behavior earlier that day, the metal case she had carried toward the restricted building. "Maybe they're just reviewing old records," she suggested, though the explanation sounded weak even to her own ears. "Maybe," Marcus conceded. "Or maybe they're continuing whatever research started here 50 years ago." He fixed Sarah with an intent gaze. "You're working with Thompson now. Keep your eyes open. You might see things the rest of us don't get access to." The conversation shifted to more mundane topics after that, but Marcus's words lingered in Sarah's mind as she returned to her cabin later that evening. The questions they raised fed into her own growing suspicions about Eagle's Nest, the unusual architecture, the restricted areas, Dr. Blackwood's evasiveness, Jack's non-answer about knowing her father. Sleep was elusive that night. Sarah lay awake, her mind spinning with half-formed theories and unanswered questions. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were fragmented in uneasy corridors that led nowhere. Locked doors, the sound of machinery humming behind thick walls. She woke to the sound of raindrops pattering against her cabin roof. The mountains were shrouded in mist, the lake barely visible through the gray curtain of steady rainfall. The weather matched her mood, unsettled and overcast with lurking shadows. Despite the rain, Sarah made her way to Cabin 7 for her scheduled session with Jack. She found him already there, building a fire against the morning chill. Noah sat at a small table by the window, focused intently on a model airplane, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "Morning," Jack greeted her, his voice warm despite the weather. "Hope you don't mind company today. School's canceled because Mrs. Chambers has a doctor's appointment in town." "I don't mind," Sarah replied, surprised to find it true. Noah's presence was more comforting than intrusive. The boy looked up from his model long enough to offer a gap-toothed smile. "I'm building a P-51 Mustang," he announced proudly, "just like the one Grandpa flew." Jack shot his son a quick glance that Sarah couldn't interpret. "Your father was a pilot?" she asked, wheeling closer to examine the model. "Air Force," Jack confirmed, his tone carefully neutral. "Flew in Vietnam." Noah returned to his model with renewed focus, and Jack motioned Sarah toward the fire. "Did you try writing in the journal?" Sarah nodded, producing Rebecca's journal from the bag hanging from her wheelchair. "It was harder than I expected." "Usually is," Jack agreed. "Putting yourself on paper makes things real in a way that just thinking about them doesn't." They began the session similarly to the previous day, but with a subtle shift in focus. Where yesterday had been about remembering who she was before today, Jack guided her toward examining who she might become. "The body you had is gone," he said, his directness startling, but somehow not cruel. "Just like the man I was before Rebecca died is gone. We don't get those versions of ourselves back. What we get is the chance to build something new from what remains." "That's not very encouraging," Sarah observed, though she found his honesty refreshing after months of carefully worded optimism from other doctors. "Isn't it?" Jack challenged. "Most people go their whole lives without ever having to really decide who they are. They follow the path of least resistance, becoming whatever circumstances and other people's expectations shape them into." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You've been given something rare, Sarah. The chance to deliberately choose who you become next." "I didn't want that chance," she said, a flash of the old anger surfacing. "I liked who I was." Jack nodded, accepting her anger without judgment. "I know. Just like I liked being Rebecca's husband. Just like Noah liked having a mother." His voice remained steady. "We don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond." From the table by the window, Noah's small voice piped up. "Dad says we can be sad about what we lost or grateful for what we still have. Sometimes both at the same time." Jack smiled at his son with evident pride. Wise beyond his years, that one. The session continued, more challenging than the previous day, but also more engaging. Jack had Sarah visualize herself 5 years in the future, describing not what she would be doing, but how she would be feeling. He introduced breathing techniques developed for soldiers with PTSD, explaining how trauma lived in the body beyond the mind's conscious awareness. Throughout, Noah remained absorbed in his model building, occasionally offering unexpectedly profound observations that suggested he had been listening more closely than he appeared. As their time drew to a close, Jack handed Sarah a small wooden box, similar to the one they had used the day before. "Your homework," he explained. "Inside are photographs of patients I've worked with, people who found new paths after injuries similar to yours. I want you to look at each one and write down what you see in their eyes." The unusual assignment piqued Sarah's curiosity. "What am I looking for?" "You'll know when you see it," Jack replied cryptically. As Sarah prepared to leave, the rain having subsided to a gentle mist, Noah approached with a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "It's the surprise I promised." Sarah unfolded the paper to find a drawing of herself by the lake, rendered with the same careful attention to detail he had shown in the portrait of his mother. In the drawing, Sarah was smiling, a detail that existed only in Noah's imagination, as she couldn't remember smiling in his presence. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you, Noah." The boy beamed, then returned to his model airplane, the exchange complete in his mind. Outside, the mountain air was fresh with the scent of rain-washed pine. Sarah tucked Noah's drawing carefully into Rebecca's journal, oddly moved by the child's gift. As she followed the path back toward her cabin, a familiar figure emerged from the direction of the main building. Robert Mitchell returned from his business in Alexandria earlier than expected. Her father looked exactly as he always did, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place among the rustic surroundings, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, his posture military straight. But there was something in his expression as he approached, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he called, quickening his pace. "I've been looking for you." "Dad," she replied, surprised by his sudden appearance. "I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." Plans changed. Robert reached her, his eyes scanning her face with unusual intensity. "Where have you been?" The question carried a note of demand that sparked her defenses. "Therapy session with Jack Thompson." Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And how was it different?" Sarah said cautiously, noting her father's barely concealed tension. "But interesting. I'd like to meet this Thompson." Robert stated his tone, making it clear this was more than casual interest. "Dr. Blackwood speaks highly of him, but I prefer to make my own assessments." "He's probably still at his cabin," Sarah said, gesturing back the way she had come. "Cabin 7 near the tree line." Robert nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll find him. You should get out of this damp air. We don't want you catching cold on top of everything else." The comment, well-intentioned but infantilizing, would have irritated Sarah a week ago. Now, after her sessions with Jack, She recognized it for what it was, her father's attempt to control what little he could in a situation that had left him feeling powerless. "I'll be fine," she assured him. The rain's almost stopped. Robert hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to see Thompson immediately and his reluctance to leave his daughter. Finally, he nodded. "I'll come find you after I've spoken with him. We need to discuss your treatment plan going forward." As Robert strode purposefully in the direction of Cabin 7, Sarah felt a twinge of unease. Something about her father's demeanor suggested this was more than his usual protective concern. There was an urgency to his movements, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of deeper concerns than whether his daughter's therapy was progressing adequately. Instead of returning to her cabin, as Robert had suggested, Sarah found herself wheeling along a parallel path that would allow her to circle back toward Cabin 7 without being immediately visible from the main approach. A part of her recognized the childishness of essentially spying on her father, but her curiosity about his reaction to Jack overrode her better judgment. She positioned herself near a stand of pine trees that offered a view of the cabin's entrance, while providing reasonable cover. From this vantage point, she could see Robert knock on the door, his posture rigid with what she now recognized as barely contained anger, rather than mere concern. Jack answered almost immediately, Noah visible behind him in the doorway. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the moment of recognition that passed between the two men, a flash of mutual acknowledgement that confirmed her growing suspicion that they had indeed met before, despite Jack's earlier evasion. Robert said something she couldn't hear, his gestures sharp and controlled. Jack responded with a calmness that seemed to further agitate her father. After a brief exchange, Jack stepped aside, allowing Robert to enter the cabin. The door closed behind them, cutting off Sarah's view of the confrontation. Frustrated by her limited perspective, Sarah moved closer, finding a position near an open window at the side of the cabin. The voices inside were now audible, though she had to strain to hear clearly. "Completely inappropriate," Robert was saying, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "You should have disclosed your involvement immediately." "Would you have listened?" Jack's response was measured. "Or would you have dismissed me out of hand because of our history? That history, and as you call it, is precisely why you shouldn't be anywhere near my daughter." Robert's voice rose slightly. "Does she know about your connection to the project, about what happened to Rebecca?" There was a pause before Jack responded, his voice lower now. "No, and there's no reason she needs to know. What happened 20 years ago has no bearing on Sarah's treatment." "Everything that happened then has bearing on this," Robert insisted. "Eagle's Nest isn't what she thinks it is, what any of these patients think it is. It's a rehabilitation center," Jack said firmly. "Whatever it was before, that's what it is now." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Robert's tone was scathing. "That you're just helping people recover? That there's nothing more to your work with Blackwood?" "My only concern is Sarah's well-being," Jack replied, an edge entering his voice for the first time. "Which is more than I can say for the Mitchell Defense Systems Board of Directors." The conversation was abruptly interrupted by Noah's voice, high and clear. "Dad, is something wrong?" Sarah heard Jack's tone soften immediately. "No, buddy. Mr. Mitchell and I just need to discuss some grown-up things. Why don't you take your model to the bedroom for a while?" There was the sound of movement, then a door closing. When the conversation resumed, both men had lowered their voices, making it harder for Sarah to catch every word. "Not using my daughter as a test subject," Robert was saying. "Never my intention," Jack replied. "But you know as well as I do that the Phoenix protocols showed promise before the shutdown." "Those protocols were experimental at best, dangerous at worst," Robert countered, "and they were never meant to be applied without full military oversight." "The military had their chance." Jack's voice hardened. "They abandoned those men, abandoned the research when it became politically inconvenient." "That research cost lives," Robert hissed, "including nearly yours." "It also saved some," Jack insisted. "Or have you conveniently forgotten that part?" The conversation shifted again, moving away from the window and deeper into the cabin. Sarah strained to hear, but could only catch fragments. Now something about original documentation, Blackwood's clearance, and the general's approval. Frustrated and increasingly concerned by what she had overheard, Sarah began to wheel away from her hiding place. As she moved, her wheelchair caught on an exposed root, causing the wheels to briefly skid on the damp ground. The noise was slight, but in the quiet aftermath of the rain it carried. The cabin door opened abruptly and Jack stood framed in the entrance, his eyes scanning the surrounding area with military precision. Sarah froze, partially concealed by the pine trees, but certain she would be spotted if she moved again. For a heart-stopping moment, Jack's gaze seemed to fix directly on her hiding place. Then Robert appeared behind him, saying something that drew his attention back inside. The door closed and Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She retreated as quietly as possible, mind racing with questions raised by the confrontation she had witnessed. What was the Phoenix Protocol they had discussed? What had happened 20 years ago that connected Jack and her father? And most disturbing of all, what was Eagle's Nest really beneath its facade? It's a rehabilitation center. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the emerging sunlight. Sarah made her way to the lake, needing space to process what she had heard. The peaceful setting stood in stark contrast to her turbulent thoughts. As she sat by the water's edge, watching ripples spread across the surface, she opened Rebecca's journal and removed Noah's drawing. The child had captured something in her expression that she hadn't seen in herself for months. A spark of life, a hint of the person she had been before the accident. Not the dancer, but the human being beneath the professional identity. The drawing reminded her of Jack's words earlier that day. We don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond. Whatever secrets lay buried at Eagle's Nest, whatever connection existed between Jack and her father, Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. She could retreat back into the numbing safety of victimhood, allowing others to make decisions about her life and treatment. Or she could choose to engage, to investigate, to reclaim agency over her own story. The choice seemed clear when framed that way. If Eagle's Nest held secrets that might affect her recovery, she deserved to know what they were. And if Jack Thompson was more than the simple healer he presented himself, as she needed to discover his true motives. With newfound determination, Sarah began to formulate a plan. Robert would expect her to be in her cabin processing their impending discussion about her treatment plan. That would give her a window of opportunity to investigate the restricted area, the old stone building, that seemed to be at the center of Eagle's Nest's mysteries. As she wheeled back toward the main complex, Sarah noticed increased activity around the administrative offices. Staff members moved with unusual urgency, and she caught a glimpse of Dr. Blackwood through a window, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with two men in dark suits she didn't recognize. Keeping to less traveled paths, Sarah made her way toward the stone building she had observed Dr. Blackwood entering the previous day. The area was quiet now, no sign of the doctor or the mysterious metal case. The building itself looked even more forbidding in the aftermath of the rain, its gray stone darkened by moisture, narrow windows reflecting nothing but shadow. The door, as expected, was locked, a heavy wooden barrier reinforced with metal bands that seemed excessive for a simple storage facility. Sarah examined it carefully, noting the modern keypad lock that stood in stark contrast to the building's age. Whatever was inside was secured with technology far beyond what would be needed for old furniture and boxes. Frustrated but not deterred, Sarah circled the building looking for another way in. The windows were too high for her to reach from her wheelchair, and there were no other visible entrances. As she completed her circuit, she noticed something she had missed before: a basement window at ground level, partially obscured by overgrown shrubbery. Maneuvering her wheelchair as close as possible, Sarah pushed aside the wet branches to reveal a small window set deep in the stone foundation. Unlike the others, this one was not reinforced, though a layer of dust and grime made it impossible to see inside. Using a small stick from the ground, she carefully cleared some of the dirt away, creating a small section clear enough to peer through. The interior was dark, but as her eyes adjusted, Sarah could make out what appeared to be an old laboratory setup. Long tables with equipment covered in protective sheets, filing cabinets lined against one wall, shelves containing what looked like specimen jars or containers. "It's not polite to snoop," a voice said behind her. Sarah jerked away from the window, heart pounding to find Noah standing a few feet away. The boy's expression was unusually serious, his usual cheerfulness replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Noah," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you startled me." "You're not supposed to be here," he said, glancing nervously at the building. "No one is except Dad and Dr. Blackwood." "I was just curious," Sarah explained, wheeling away from the incriminating window. "About what's inside." Noah shifted uncomfortably. "Bad things happened here. A long time ago." "What kind of bad things?" The boy shook his head. Dad doesn't talk about it. But sometimes I hear him and your Blackwood. They argue about the soldiers. Soldiers, Sarah prompted gently. The ones who didn't get better. Noah's voice dropped to a whisper. The ones like Dad. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a sharp voice cut through the air. Noah, what are you doing out here? Blackwood strode toward them, her expression a careful mask of professional concern that didn't quite hide the alarm in her eyes. This area is off limits to patients and visitors, she said, her gaze shifting to Sarah. For safety reasons. I was just exploring, Sarah said, matching the doctor's neutral tone. Noah was kind enough to remind me about the restrictions. Dr. Blackwood placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. Why don't you run along and find your father? I believe he's looking for you. The boy hesitated, looking between Sarah and the doctor with obvious uncertainty. Then he nodded and turned to go, casting one last glance at Sarah before disappearing down the path. Once Noah was out of earshot, Dr. Blackwood's professional veneer hardened. Miss Mitchell, I believe I was quite clear about this area being restricted. You were, Sarah acknowledged, but you weren't clear about why. What exactly is in that building, Dr. Blackwood? Old research files, laboratory equipment, or something you don't want the patients to know about? The doctor's expression remained impassive, but Sarah noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. The building contains remnants from the facility's previous function. Nothing relevant to your treatment or recovery. Then why the secrecy? Why the keypad lock on a storage room? Sarah pressed. Some of the materials are historically sensitive, Dr. Blackwood replied smoothly. Government property that was never fully decommissioned when the facility changed hands. Government property related to something called Phoenix, Sarah asked, watching closely for the doctor's reaction. She wasn't disappointed. Dr. Blackwood's composed facade cracked momentarily, surprise and alarm flashing across her features before she regained control. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? Sarah countered. What matters is that there's something going on here beyond physical therapy and nature walks. Something that involves my father, Jack Thompson, and whatever happened in that building 20 years ago. Dr. Blackwood studied her for a long moment, calculation evident in her gaze. You're very much your father's daughter, she finally said. Same perception, same determination. She gestured toward the path. Let's continue this conversation somewhere more appropriate. As they moved away from the restricted building, Sarah noticed two men in dark suits watching from the edge of the tree line, the same men she had glimpsed earlier with Dr. Blackwood. Their presence added another layer to the growing mystery surrounding Eagle's Nest. Those men, Sarah nodded toward the observers, they're not part of your staff. No, Dr. Blackwood agreed, not bothering to deny their presence. They represent certain interests in the continued security of this facility. Government interests, in a manner of speaking. The doctor led them to a small gazebo overlooking the lake, positioned where they could speak privately while remaining in full view of the main complex. What exactly do you think is happening here, Miss Mitchell? Sarah considered her response carefully. I think Eagle's Nest was something else before it became a rehabilitation center. Something military. I think whatever research was conducted here didn't end when the facility changed hands. And I think my father knew exactly what this place was when he sent me here. Dr. Blackwood nodded slightly, as if Sarah had passed some kind of test. Your assessment is partially correct. Eagle's Nest was indeed a military research facility focused on neural recovery protocols for injured soldiers. When the program was officially terminated in the mid-90s, I acquired the property with the intention of continuing aspects of that research in a civilian context. Neural recovery, Sarah repeated. You mean like spinal cord injuries like mine? Among others, Dr. Blackwood confirmed, the original Phoenix project showed remarkable promise before political considerations forced its closure. Lives that could have been saved, injuries that could have been healed, sacrificed to bureaucratic cowardice. And my father's connection to all this, Dr. Blackwood's expression grew more guarded. That's a conversation you should have with Robert directly, or with Jack Thompson, since you seem to have developed a rapport with him. I'd rather hear it from you, Sarah insisted, without their filters or agendas. The doctor seemed to weigh her options before responding. Your father was part of the Military Oversight Committee for Phoenix. He believed in the project's potential until complications arose with certain test subjects. After that, he became one of its most vocal critics. And Jack, Captain Thompson was one of our most promising participants, Dr. Blackwood said carefully. His unique neurological response to the protocols marked him as exceptional. Unfortunately, before we could fully document his progress, the project was terminated. Sarah processed this information, fitting it against the fragments she had overheard between Jack and her father. So Jack was a test subject, not just a combat medic. He was both, Dr. Blackwood corrected. His medical training made him particularly valuable to the research team. He understood what was happening to him in ways other subjects couldn't. And now he's here working with patients like me, Sarah said slowly, using what he learned from Phoenix. Using what Phoenix gave him, the doctor amended. Jack's abilities after the protocols were enhanced. His understanding of neural pathways, his intuitive grasp of how trauma affects the nervous system, these are direct results of his participation in the project. The implications were staggering. Sarah tried to reconcile the straightforward healer she had come to know with this new information, a man who had been subjected to experimental protocols, who possessed abilities beyond normal medical training. Does he use these abilities on his patients? She asked, unable to keep a note of apprehension from her voice. Dr. Blackwood shook her head. Not in the way you're imagining. Jack's approach is fundamentally holistic, combining his medical knowledge, his personal experience of trauma and recovery, and yes, the unique neural architecture that Phoenix left him with. But there are no experimental drugs, no invasive procedures. Just a healer with exceptional gifts, helping those in need. As they sat in the gazebo, the sun beginning its descent behind the mountains, Sarah found herself at another crossroads. She could accept Dr. Blackwood's explanation, continue her sessions with Jack, and perhaps benefit from whatever gifts his unusual background had provided him. Or she could demand answers to the questions still lingering about Rebecca's death, about Noah's cryptic reference to soldiers who didn't get better, about the men in dark suits who watched from the shadows. Before she could decide, a figure appeared on the path leading to the gazebo. Robert Mitchell, his expression set in grim determination. Behind him, at a slight distance, came Jack Thompson, his posture suggesting reluctance but resolution. "Sarah," Robert called as he approached, "we need to talk about Eagle's Nest, about everything." The three figures approached the gazebo with the gravity of men walking into battle. Robert Mitchell led the way, his military bearing more pronounced than ever, silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. Jack Thompson followed his movements fluid despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Dr. Blackwood stood to greet them, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Sarah felt suddenly vulnerable, seated in her wheelchair, at the center of what was clearly a long-brewing confrontation. Whatever secrets had been buried at Eagle's Nest were about to surface with her somehow at the epicenter. "I see you've already started the conversation," Robert said, his voice tight as he glanced between Sarah and Dr. Blackwood. "How much have you told her?" "The basic framework," Dr. Blackwood replied evenly. "The rest should come from you and Captain Thompson." Jack winced slightly at the military title. "Haven't been Captain Thompson for a long time, Eleanor." Robert turned to Sarah, his expression softening, as it always did when he looked at his daughter. "I owe you an explanation. Several, in fact." He took a seat on the bench opposite her wheelchair. "I should have been honest from the beginning about Eagle's Nest, about Jack, about all of it." "Then be honest now," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "What is this place really? And why did you send me here?" Robert exchanged glances with Jack before answering. Eagle's Nest was a classified military research facility operational from 1963 until 1995. Its official designation was the Neural Recovery Research Division, but those of us involved knew it as Project Phoenix. "Phoenix," Sarah repeated, "like the mythical bird that rises from its ashes." "Exactly," Dr. Blackwood interjected. "The name was chosen deliberately, symbolizing rebirth after catastrophic injury." Robert continued, his voice taking on the cadence he used in board presentations. "The project was established during the Cold War, initially focusing on treating traumatic brain injuries sustained by intelligence operatives. By the 80s, its scope had expanded to include spinal cord injuries, nerve damage from chemical exposures, and other neurological trauma common among combat veterans." "And you were part of this?" Sarah asked, looking between her father and Jack. "I served on the Oversight Committee," Robert confirmed. "As a rising star at Mitchell Defense, I was tasked with evaluating the project's progress and potential military applications. Jack was something else entirely. All eyes turned to Jack, who stood with his hands in his pockets looking out over the lake. After a moment, he spoke without turning. I was a test subject, one of dozens recruited from military medical units because of our understanding of trauma care. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. We were told the protocols would enhance our ability to treat wounded soldiers in the field. What they didn't tell us was that we were the experiment, not just participants in it. The Phoenix protocols were groundbreaking, Dr. Blackwood said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. Neural stimulation combined with targeted cellular regeneration. Nothing like it had been attempted before or since, Rustem. They were experimental and dangerous, Robert countered sharply, especially the later variations. They worked on some of us, Jack turned finally, his gaze meeting Sarah's. That's the part your father doesn't like to remember. For every failure, there were successes. Soldiers who recovered abilities no one thought possible. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. So what gained some kind of healing powers from these experiments? Jack shook his head, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Nothing so dramatic. The protocols altered certain neural pathways, creating new connections that allowed some of us to perceive the body's electrical systems more acutely, to feel where energy was blocked, where connections were broken. He flexed his hands unconsciously. In my case, it also enhanced proprioception awareness of my body and space, and with it the ability to guide others in reconnecting with their own bodies. That's why your approach is different, Sarah realized. You're not just using standard medical knowledge. I'm using everything I have, Jack confirmed, including the changes Phoenix left me with. Robert stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the gazebo. What Jack isn't telling you is the cost of those changes. The men who didn't survive the protocols, the ones who did survive but were never the same. He stopped, fixing Jack with a hard stare. Tell her about Rebecca. A shadow passed over Jack's features. For the first time since Sarah had met him, she saw raw pain break through his careful composure. Rebecca was part of the research team, a neurologist specializing in music therapy as a pathway to neural recovery. We met during my time as a subject, fell in love, got married after I left the program. His voice grew softer. She was the one who first noticed the changes in me, subtle differences in how I moved, how I perceived physical sensations. She called it body empathy, the ability to sense others' physical states almost as if they were my own. In the accident, Sarah prompted, gently remembering Dr. Blackwood's words about Jack's wife. Jack's eyes closed briefly. 5 years ago, we were driving back from a medical conference in Richmond. Semi-truck lost control on a wet highway, jackknifed across 3 lanes. His eyes opened, meeting Sarah's with startling intensity. Just like your accident. A chill ran through Sarah despite the warmth of the evening. That can't be coincidence. It wasn't, Robert said grimly. The truck that hit you was carrying experimental composite materials developed by a Mitchell Defense subsidiary, the same composites that were in the truck that struck Jack and Rebecca. Your company's truck hit me, Sarah's voice rose with disbelief. And you never told me, Robert held up his hands. It wasn't that simple. The truck was contracted by a competitor, Meridian Systems, but carrying our materials. The driver was found to have been drugged, his route deliberately altered to intercept yours. His voice grew heavy. It wasn't an accident, Sarah. It was industrial espionage gone wrong. They wanted our prototype materials. They never meant to hurt you. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. For 8 months, she had been picturing a random tragedy, a moment of bad luck that had destroyed her career and future. The idea that it had been deliberate, even if she wasn't the intended target, shifted the foundations of her understanding. Why wouldn't you tell me this? She asked, anger building beneath her shock. Because it's still an active FBI investigation, Robert replied. And because I was trying to protect you from the truth that your injury was collateral damage in a corporate war. His voice broke slightly. My corporate war. Dr. Blackwood stepped forward. When Robert contacted me about your case, I recognized the pattern immediately. The similarities to Jack's accident were too precise to ignore. So you brought me here to work with Jack because he survived a similar crash? Sarah asked. I brought you here because Jack has helped patients recover from spinal cord injuries that conventional medicine had written off as permanent, Robert corrected. His success rate with certain types of neurological trauma is unprecedented. And yes, because he understood what happened to you in a way no other doctor could. Sarah turned to Jack. Did you know about this connection when we started working together? Jack nodded slowly. I knew about the similarities in our accidents. Dr. Blackwood briefed me before you arrived. His expression grew troubled. What I didn't know until yesterday was that your father had blocked my earlier attempts to contact you. Robert had the grace to look uncomfortable. I had concerns about Thompson's methods, his connection to Phoenix, the fact that he was no longer practicing medicine through conventional channels. You were afraid of what I might tell her, Jack challenged, about Phoenix, about Mitchell Defense's role in it. I was protecting my daughter, Robert insisted. From what? Sarah demanded. The truth or your part in it? The confrontation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel path. Noah appeared running toward the gazebo with unusual urgency, his small face tight with worry. Dad, he called, the men in suits are at our cabin. They're looking through your things. Jack straightened immediately, all traces of the philosophical healer replaced by the alert readiness of a soldier. Stay here, he instructed, already moving toward the path. Wait, Robert commanded, his voice snapping with authority. If Meridian's people are here, none of us should be alone. He turned to Dr. Blackwood. Security protocols, Eleanor. Now. The doctor nodded sharply, pulling a small device from her pocket and pressing a sequence of buttons. In the distance, a low alarm began to sound from the main building. Lockdown, she explained to Sarah. Standard procedure for security breaches. All patients will be moved to the central facility until the threat is contained. Jack had reached Noah, kneeling to speak to him quickly before sending him toward the main complex with a gentle push. He returned to the gazebo, his expression grim. If they're searching my cabin, they know about the files, he said to Robert. How much does Sarah need to know? Everything, Sarah interjected before her father could answer. I need to know everything. Robert hesitated, then nodded. The stone building. We need to get there before they do. The unlikely group moved quickly through the gathering dusk, Robert pushing Sarah's wheelchair along paths that had suddenly become fraught with hidden meanings and dangers. Jack led the way, his movements fluid and watchful, while Dr. Blackwood brought up the rear, communicating through a small radio with what appeared to be a security team. As they approached the stone building, Sarah noticed the key padlock had been disengaged, the heavy door standing slightly ajar. Jack motioned for them to stop, then moved forward alone, his posture shifting subtly into a combat stance she had never seen him use before. After a tense moment, he beckoned them forward. Clear for now, but they've been here, recently. He pointed to scuff marks on the floor inside. They knew exactly what they were looking for. The interior of the building was a stark contrast to the rustic atmosphere of Eagle's Nest. Clinical white walls, polished concrete floors, and stainless steel fixtures created an environment that felt displaced in time, neither fully modern nor properly historic. The main room contained what looked like medical equipment, draped in protective covers, filing cabinets lined against one wall, and a series of computer workstations that appeared surprisingly current. The original Phoenix laboratory, Dr. Blackwood explained as they entered, preserved much as it was when the program was officially terminated, but with updated monitoring systems. You've been continuing the research, Sarah realized, taking in the clearly operational equipment. All this time, with significant modifications, the doctor clarified, and with strictly civilian applications. No military involvement, no experimental protocols without full informed consent. Robert moved to one of the workstations, typing rapidly on a keyboard. The digital archives appear untouched, he reported. But the physical files, gone, Jack confirmed, examining an empty cabinet. All of them, Dr. Blackwood swore under her breath. The original research journals, the handwritten observations from the early test subjects, irreplaceable documentation of the protocol's development. In proof of what really happened here, Jack added grimly. Who was responsible for the side effects? The deaths. Robert turned to Sarah, his expression grave. There's something else you need to see. Something that explains why it brought you to Eagle's Nest. He gestured toward the doorway at the far end of the room. The lower level. Jack moved to Sarah's wheelchair. The elevator is this way, he said quietly, installed during the original construction for moving equipment between floors. The elevator was small but functional, designed to accommodate medical gurneys according to the faded markings on its interior. And as they descended, Sarah felt the air grow cooler, carrying the faint antiseptic scent she had detected in her dreams of this place. The doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with heavy doors, each bearing a number, and what looked like a medical classification code. The walls were institutional green, the floors the same polished concrete as above. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, shadowless illumination that felt deliberately exposing. The treatment rooms, Blackwood said, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space, where the protocols were administered. Jack's face had gone tight, his breathing carefully controlled. Sarah realized with a shock that he was fighting some powerful physical response to being here, a memory written into his bodies that transcended the passing years. "You were down here," she said softly, "as a patient." He nodded once, sharp and controlled. 16 weeks, the longest any subject remained in active protocol administration. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "Room 7, end of the hall." Robert led them past several closed doors until they reached a room marked with the number 12. Unlike the others, this door stood partially open, light spilling from within. He paused, looking from Jack to Sarah. "What's in there has been classified at the highest levels for 20 years, he said quietly. "What I'm about to show you violates at least 6 federal statutes. But you deserve to know, both of you." The room beyond was smaller than Sarah had expected, dominated by a central examination table surrounded by monitoring equipment. One wall was covered with photographs and medical charts, dozens of faces, mostly men, but some women, their expressions uniformly solemn as they stared into the camera. Service members, Sarah realized, recognizing the bearing, if not the now outdated uniforms. "The Phoenix cohort," Dr. Blackwood explained, following Sarah's gaze to the wall of photographs. 83 subjects between 1986 and 1995. Combat medics, field surgeons, medical technicians, all with direct experience treating trauma under battlefield conditions. "How many survived the protocols?" Sarah asked, noting the red marks through certain photographs. 67 completed the full course," Jack answered before Dr. Blackwood could speak. 52 survived the first year after completion. 41 were still alive 5 years later. His voice remained clinical, detached, as if he were reading statistics about strangers rather than comrades. "Now there are 23 of us left. And of those 23, only 9 developed the enhanced abilities the project was designed to produce," Robert added. 9 successes out of 83 test subjects. "1 in 9, Sarah murmured. "Hardly seems worth the cost." "That depends on what those 9 can do," Blackwood countered. She moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, removing a thick folder marked with classified stamps and Jack's name. Captain Thompson's results were the most promising of all subjects. His neural adaptation to the protocols exceeded all projected outcomes. Jack looked away, visibly uncomfortable with the discussion of his capabilities. "Show her why she's here, Robert. No more circling the truth." Robert nodded, moving to a computer workstation in the corner. After typing briefly, he stepped back as a screen on the wall illuminated, displaying what appeared to be a medical scan of a spinal column. "This is your initial injury assessment," he said to Sarah. "Taken immediately after your accident. T10, complete spinal cord injury with severe compression and transection of the cord." He tapped a key and the image changed to a second scan. "This is from 3 months ago, just before I contacted Eagle's Nest. Notice the unusual neural activity below the injury site." Sarah studied the images, recognizing enough from her months of medical consultations to see the difference. Where the first scan showed a clear break in the spinal cord, the second revealed faint but unmistakable signs of activity, bridging the damaged area. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Every specialist said the damage was permanent, that the cord was completely severed. Conventional medicine doesn't account for certain types of neural regeneration, Doctor," Blackwood explained, "particularly in cases where the patient has unusual genetic factors." She glanced at Robert. "Factors that might be inherited." Sarah looked between her father and Jack, understanding dawning slowly. "You were in Phoenix too," she said to Robert. "Not just as oversight, as a subject." Robert nodded, the admission clearly difficult. "Early phase, 1987. Before I founded Mitchell Defense. I was a major, then assigned to evaluate the program's potential. I volunteered for the initial protocols to understand what we were asking of our soldiers." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a faint scar running the length of his forearm. Shrapnel wound during a site inspection in Panama. Should have lost the arm. After the protocol's full recovery in 8 weeks. The protocols alter neural pathways permanently, Dr. Blackwood continued. And there's evidence suggesting these alterations can be passed genetically to offspring. Your injury should have been permanently debilitating, Sarah, but your scans show signs of spontaneous regeneration consistent with what we observed in Phoenix subjects. You're saying I inherited some kind of healing ability from my father? Sarah asked incredulously. Not healing as such, Jack clarified, but resilience, neural plasticity beyond normal parameters. The ability to forge new pathways where standard medicine says none should exist. He moved to stand beside the examination table, his expression softening from clinical detachment to something more personal. That's why your father brought you here. Why he sought me out despite our complicated history. Because if anyone could help you access that potential, it would be someone who's experienced it firsthand. Sarah's mind reeled with implications. Her father had been part of the same experimental program that had transformed Jack. The accident that had shattered her career wasn't random chance but deliberate corporate sabotage. And now she was being told that she possessed some inherited capacity for recovery that defied medical understanding. If you knew all this, she said to Robert, why wait 8 months? Why put me through specialist after specialist, who all told me I'd never walk again? Because I needed to be sure, Robert replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. The Phoenix protocols had side effects beyond the physical. Neurological changes, personality alterations, psychological impacts that weren't always immediately apparent. He looked at Jack. I needed to know you were stable enough for what might be required. You were afraid I'd end up like the others, Jack stated flatly. The ones who couldn't integrate the changes. Robert didn't deny it. Rebecca's death affected you profoundly. There were reports of erratic behavior periods of withdrawal. I needed to be certain before I entrusted my daughter to your care. And now Meridian knows, Dr. Blackwood cut in, bringing them back to the immediate threat. They've taken the original Phoenix files, which means they know about Sarah's potential and Jack's abilities. If they're after the protocols, they're after me, Jack finished, and possibly Sarah too, as proof of concept. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the elevator activating above them. All four turned toward the corridor, tension immediately filling the room. Security team of Robert asked Dr. Blackwood. She shook her head, checking her radio. All teams are securing the main building and perimeter. No one should be coming down here. Jack moved to the doorway, gesturing for the others to stay back. 3 options, he said quietly. Stay here and hope it's friendly. Try to reach the emergency stairs at the end of the corridor. Or confront whoever's coming. Noah, Sarah suddenly realized. Where is Noah? Is he safe? With Mrs. Chambers in the secure area, Jack assured her, though concern flickered across his features. At least that's where he should be. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that seemed jarringly normal in the tense atmosphere. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a third figure Sarah recognized with a jolt, Marcus, the young amputee from the dining hall. He moved with surprising agility on his prosthetic leg, a pistol held casually at his side. Captain Thompson, he called down the corridor, I know you're down here. You and Mitchell and his daughter. Let's not make this any more complicated than it needs to be. Jack glanced back at the others, his expression grim. Stay here, he whispered. There's another way out through the specimen storage room. Blackwood knows where. He slipped something from his pocket, a small key card, and pressed it into Sarah's hand. Get to cabin 7, under the floorboards beneath the bed. Everything you need is there. Before anyone could stop him, Jack stepped into the corridor. I'm here, Marcus, he called, his voice steady. Just me. The others evacuated with the security team. Sarah could hear Marcus's disbelieving laugh. Nice try, Captain, but my associates have already confirmed Mitchell and his daughter came down here with you, along with the good doctor. There was a pause. We just want the files and a conversation. No one needs to get hurt. The files are gone, Jack replied. Someone beat you to them. That's disappointing, Marcus said, his voice closer now, but not catastrophic. After all, we have the next best thing, one of the original test subjects. Living proof of what Phoenix could achieve. Sarah felt Robert's hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "The storage room," he whispered. "Now." Dr. Blackwood was already moving toward a door at the back of the examination room, unlocking it with a key from her pocket. Beyond lay a larger chamber filled with shelving units, containing specimen jars, tissue samples preserved in fluid, and what appeared to be medical equipment from several decades past. "The service tunnel connects to the main building," Dr. Blackwood explained in a hushed tone as they entered. "It was designed as an evacuation route in case of experimental contamination." In the corridor outside, they could hear Jack still engaged in conversation with Marcus, his voice deliberately projecting to cover the sounds of their movement. "Meridian can't replicate Phoenix," he was saying. "The original researchers are gone. The methodologies were never fully documented. Even the compounds used in the protocols degraded beyond usefulness years ago." "That's where you're wrong, Captain," Marcus replied. "Meridian has been very thorough in reconstructing the program. We have former Phoenix staff on payroll. We've synthesized improved versions of the original compounds. All we need now is verification that the long-term effects are as promising as we believe, which is where you come in." As Dr. Blackwood led them through the specimen storage room toward a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," Sarah found herself fighting dual impulses to flee with her father to safety and to remain with Jack, who was placing himself in danger to protect them. The weight of the key card in her palm seemed to grow heavier with each step, a tangible reminder of Jack's trust in her. Robert sensed her hesitation. "He knows what he's doing, Sarah," he whispered. "Jack was Special Forces before he was a medic, and Phoenix enhanced more than just his healing abilities." The implication was clear. Jack was more capable of handling the armed intruders than any of them. Still, leaving him behind felt wrong in ways Sarah couldn't fully articulate even to herself. Dr. Blackwood had reached the door, entering a code on a keypad beside it. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and she pushed it open to reveal a narrow concrete tunnel illuminated by emergency lighting strips along the floor. "This will take us to the main building's sublevel," she explained. "From there, we can access the secure area where the other patients have been evacuated." Robert moved to take control of Sarah's wheelchair, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "No," she said firmly. "We're not running, not without Jack." "Sarah, be reasonable," Robert urged. "Thompson is buying us time to get to safety. We need to use it." "And then what?" Sarah challenged. "Let Meridian take him. Let them continue what Phoenix started with fresh test subjects." She turned her wheelchair away from the tunnel entrance. "I'm not leaving him behind. Not after he's risked everything to help me." "She's right," Dr. Blackwood said unexpectedly. "Jack is too valuable to the patients, to our research, to the future of neural recovery therapy. We can't let Meridian take him." Robert looked between the two women, frustration evident in his expression. "And what exactly do you propose? We're unarmed, outnumbered, and Sarah can't exactly run if things go badly." "I don't need to run," Sarah replied with sudden conviction. "I just need to be in the right place." She pulled the key card from her pocket. "Jack gave me this for a reason. He has a plan, and he's trusting us to follow it." From the examination room, they heard a sudden commotion, raised voices, the sound of something heavy falling, then silence. Dr. Blackwood moved to the storage room door, opening it a crack to peer into the room beyond. "They've taken him," she reported grimly. 3 men moving toward the elevator. "Jack appears to be conscious but compliant." "They'll take him to the main lab upstairs," Robert surmised. "More equipment there for whatever tests they want to run." Sarah made her decision. "Dr. Blackwood, get my father to safety through the tunnel, then find Noah and make sure he's secure." She turned to Robert. "Dad, I need you to trust me. For once, not as your daughter who needs protection, but as someone who knows what she has to do." Robert studied her face, seeing perhaps for the first time not the injured ballerina who needed his constant intervention, but a woman with her own strength and determination. After a long moment, he nodded. "What's your plan?" he asked simply. "Cabin 7, Sarah replied. "Whatever Jack left for us there, it's important enough that he made sure I had access to it, even if he couldn't get there himself." "You can't go alone," Robert objected. "I won't be," Sarah assured him. "But I need you to coordinate with Eagle's Nest security. Keep Meridian's people contained in the main building until I can reach the cabin." Dr. Blackwood was already on her radio, speaking in rapid coded phrases that Sarah couldn't follow. After a brief exchange, she turned back to them. "Security teams report the perimeter is secure. All known Meridian operatives are accounted for either in custody or in the main laboratory with Marcus and Jack. Then I have a clear path to Cabin 7, Sarah concluded. All I need is someone to help me get there faster than I can wheel myself. I'll go with her, a new voice said from the tunnel entrance. Noah stood there, his small face set in an expression of determination so like his father's that Sarah felt her breath catch. I know the fastest way through the woods, and I know where Dad keeps the important stuff. Noah, Dur Blackwood exclaimed, you should be in the secure area with Mrs. Chambers. Dad needs help, the boy replied simply, and Sarah knows how to help him. Robert looked at the child, then at his daughter. Something passed between them, a recognition perhaps of the same stubborn resolve he himself possessed. Finally, he nodded. Get to the cabin, he instructed Sarah. Find whatever Jack left for you. But if there's any sign of danger, any at all, you get somewhere safe and call for help. He handed her a small radio similar to Dr. Blackwood's. Direct line to me, no matter what happens. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Blackwood led them through a different section of the tunnel system, emerging through a service door near the edge of the main complex. Security personnel in unmarked tactical gear moved purposefully around the grounds, establishing a perimeter that would keep Meridian's operatives contained within the laboratory building. Noah proved to be an excellent guide, leading Sarah along paths she hadn't known existed, narrow tracks through the woods that were just wide enough for her wheelchair, but invisible to casual observation. The boy moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years exploring these grounds, occasionally stopping to help navigate a particularly challenging section of terrain. Dad and I have secret paths all over, he explained, as they paused for him to clear some fallen branches from their route, for when he needs to think, or when I need adventure. You're very brave, Noah, Sarah said softly. Your dad would be proud of how you're helping. The boy nodded, accepting the praise without false modesty. Dad says bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs doing, even when you are scared. He looked up at her with solemn eyes. Are you scared, Sarah? Yes, she admitted. But like your dad says, that doesn't mean we stop doing what needs to be done. They reached Cabin 7 as twilight deepened into true darkness, the woods around them filled with the sounds of night creatures beginning their chorus. The cabin stood dark and still, exactly as Jack had left it earlier that day, though Sarah could see signs that someone had searched it, cushions slightly, askew, books not quite aligned on shelves, a drawer not fully closed. Noah led her directly to the bedroom, a space she had never entered during her therapy sessions. It was spartanly furnished, a simple double bed, a nightstand with a reading lamp, and a chest of drawers that looked handmade. The boy dropped to his knees beside the bed, reaching underneath to pull up a section of floorboard that had been carefully cut to appear seamless with the surrounding wood. Dad's important box, he explained, withdrawing a metal container about the size of a shoebox. He told me never to touch it unless it was an emergency or he asked me to. Sarah accepted the box, surprised by its weight. The lid was secured with a small electronic lock, a keycard slot visible on one side. With a sense of ceremony that felt appropriate to the moment she inserted Jack's card, the lock disengaged with a soft click, and the lid rose slightly on hidden springs. Inside lay several items arranged with military precision, a USB drive, a leather-bound journal similar to Rebecca's, but more weathered, a small case containing what appeared to be medication vials, and an envelope with Sarah's name written in Jack's distinctive handwriting. She opened the envelope first, removing a single sheet of paper covered in the same handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, circumstances have forced my hand sooner than I'd hoped. What you'll find in this box is the truth about Phoenix, about your father's involvement, about what happened to Rebecca, and most importantly, about your own potential for recovery. The USB drive contains copies of all the original Phoenix files, including documentation of the protocols that were successful in cases similar to yours. Dr. Blackwood has the equipment to administer the treatment if you choose that path. The journal is my personal record of the past 20 years, the changes I've experienced, the abilities I've developed, and the price I've paid for them. Read it before you make any decisions about your own treatment. The medication was developed by Rebecca before her death, a refined version of the original Phoenix compounds designed to work with genetic markers similar to yours. It's safer than what was used on me, but not without risks. Whatever you decide, to remember this. You are more than your injury. You are more than your ability to walk or dance. You are Sarah Mitchell, strong, determined, and fully alive, whether standing on your feet or seated in your chair. Trust yourself. You already know the way forward. Jack Sarah stared at the letter, then at the contents of the box. Jack had prepared for this eventuality, had known that someday Meridian or another organization might come for him, might threaten what he had built at Eagle's Nest. And he had trusted her barely more than a stranger with the truth he had protected for decades. Noah, she said quietly, do you know how to get back to your father without being seen? The boy nodded solemnly. Through the old tunnels. They connect all the original building amongs. Dad showed me once but said it was only for the biggest emergencies. I think this qualifies, Sarah replied. She hesitated, looking at the child's determined face. But it might be dangerous. Your dad wouldn't want you putting yourself at risk. Dad would do it for you, Noah said with the simple certainty of a child who knew his father's heart. He says you're special, that you can get better in ways other people can't. Sarah felt something shift inside her at the boy's words, a certainty that had been building since her first conversation with Jack by the lake. Whether it was the Phoenix inheritance from her father Jack's unconventional therapy, or simply her own determination finally breaking through months of despair, she suddenly knew what she had to do. Help me get to the main lab, she said to Noah, placing the journal and USB drive in her wheelchair side pocket and securing the medication case in her lap. There's something I need to show Marcus and his Meridian friends. The journey through the underground tunnels was like moving through history itself. The oldest sections dated from the original 1960s construction concrete walls bearing faded civil defense markings and radiation symbols that spoke to the Cold War paranoia of their creation. These gave way to newer additions from the Phoenix-era clinical and utilitarian, designed for function rather than comfort. Noah moved with surprising confidence through the labyrinth, occasionally consulting marks on the walls that Sarah realized were subtle navigational aids perhaps left by Jack himself for just such an emergency. The boy's trust in her plan, formed though it was on minimal information, touched something deep within her. He believed in her because his father did. It was a simple equation in his mind, and in its simplicity lay a profound truth. They emerged from the tunnels through a service door that opened into a storage room adjacent to the main laboratory. Sarah could hear voices from beyond Marcus, speaking in the authoritative tone of someone used to being obeyed. Another man responding in clipped, technical language, and beneath it all, Jack's deeper voice calm, despite what must be a threatening situation. Stay here, she whispered to Noah, positioning her wheelchair near the door. No matter what happens, don't come out until I call for you or your dad comes to get you. The boy nodded, his eyes wide but determined. Be careful, he whispered back. Dad says Meridian people don't play fair. Sarah squeezed his hand once, then wheeled herself through the door into the main laboratory. The scene before her was surreal in its clinical detachment. Jack sat in a chair in the center of the room, electrodes attached to his temples and chest monitoring equipment displaying his vital signs on screens nearby. Marcus stood beside him now, dressed in a lab coat over his casual clothes, the transformation from fellow patient to Meridian operative complete. Two men in tactical gear stood by the main entrance, weapons holstered, but clearly accessible. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus said, registering her presence with only mild surprise. I was wondering when you'd join us, though I expected your father rather than a solo appearance. Jack's eyes met hers, a complex message passing between them. Concern for her safety, but also recognition of what she was attempting. You shouldn't be here, he said aloud, the warning belied by the approval in his gaze. I think I'm exactly where I need to be, Sarah replied, wheeling further into the room. She held up the medication case from Jack's box. Looking for these, Marcus, the refined Phoenix compounds. Marcus's expression sharpened with interest. So Thompson shared his secrets with you? Interesting. He took a step toward her. Those would be very useful to our research, yes. I thought they might be, Sarah continued, positioning her wheelchair between Jack and the monitoring equipment. But before I consider sharing them, I'd like to understand exactly what you're hoping to achieve here. Scientific advancement, Marcus replied smoothly. The Phoenix Project was ahead of its time, neural regeneration technologies that could revolutionize trauma care. Meridian simply wants to continue that important work. With unwilling test subjects, Sarah challenged. With corporate espionage and kidnapping, Marcus spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Captain Thompson's participation is a unique opportunity. His long-term adaptation to the protocols tuning provides invaluable data we can't get anywhere else. He glanced at Jack. As for the methods, well, conventional research channels weren't an option, given the classified nature of the original work. And my accident, Sarah pressed, was that part of your unconventional methods too? A flicker of genuine regret crossed Marcus's face. An unfortunate miscalculation. The operation was meant to secure the prototype materials, not cause casualties. Your presence in that particular vehicle at that particular time was statistical bad luck. Statistical bad luck, Sarah repeated the words hollow in the sterile laboratory. Is that what you tell yourselves to sleep at night? That the lives you destroy are just statistical anomalies? Before Marcus could respond, the laboratory door burst open. Robert Mitchell entered, flanked by security personnel in tactical gear, and Dr. Blackwood, her usual composure replaced by cold fury. This facility is secure, Robert announced, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military and corporate command. Your Meridian colleagues outside have been detained. You have approximately 30 seconds to step away from my daughter and Captain Thompson before I authorize these men to remove you by whatever means necessary. The Meridian operatives by the door reached for their weapons but froze as Eagle's Nest security trained rifles on them with practiced efficiency. This is a misunderstanding, Marcus began, his confident demeanor slipping slightly. Meridian Biotechnologies has legitimate interest in the research being conducted here. We were merely... Save it for the federal agents on their way, Robert cut him off. Industrial espionage, kidnapping, assault on a secured facility. The charges should keep your lawyers busy for years. He turned to the security team. Take them to the holding area. Full restraints, continuous monitoring. As the Meridian operatives were led away, their protests falling on deaf ears, Sarah wheeled herself to Jack's side. She began removing the monitoring electrodes with gentle efficiency, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. That was reckless, Jack said quietly as she worked. Coming here alone. Not alone, Sarah corrected. Noah showed me the way. At Jack's alarmed expression, she added quickly, he's safe in the storage room. He was very brave. The tension in Jack's shoulders eased slightly. Like someone else I know, he said, a hint of his usual wry humor returning. Did you read the journal? Sarah shook her head. There wasn't time. But I read your letter. She finished removing the last electrode, then handed him the medication case. Is this really what I think it is? A treatment based on the Phoenix protocols? Jack accepted the case, his expression growing serious. Rebecca's final work. A targeted neural stimulant designed to enhance natural regeneration in patients with specific genetic markers. Safer than the original protocols, but still experimental. He looked at her steadily. It might help you walk again. It might do nothing. Or it might change you in ways we can't predict. Like it changed you, Sarah said softly. Yes. Jack didn't elaborate, but the weight of that single word carried volumes of meaning. Robert approached his commanding presence, softened by evident relief at finding his daughter safe. Sarah, are you all right? She nodded, suddenly aware of how strange this scene would have appeared just days ago, herself willingly in the midst of danger. Jack Thompson as ally rather than stranger, her father looking to her for confirmation rather than imposing his protection. I'm fine, Dad, she assured him. Better than fine, actually. I know what I want to do. Robert looked between her and Jack, understanding dawning in his eyes. The treatment, you want to try it? Yes, Sarah confirmed. Not because I need to walk again to be whole, not because I can't accept life in this chair if that's my reality. She met Jack's gaze, drawing strength from what she saw there. But because I want the chance to find out what I'm capable of. The same chance you gave those other Phoenix subjects when conventional medicine had given up on them. Dr. Blackwood stepped forward. You understand the risks. The physical changes are just the beginning. The neural rewiring affects perception, emotional processing, possibly even personality. I understand, Sarah replied, but I've spent 8 months mourning who I was. I'm ready to discover who I might become. The decision made events moved with surprising speed. Noah was reunited with Jack in a fierce embrace that brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Dr. Blackwood began preparations in a smaller, more modern laboratory adjacent to the main facility, explaining that Rebecca's protocol required specialized equipment that hadn't existed during the original Phoenix era. As Sarah was being prepared for the procedure, changing into a medical gown, having monitoring sensors attached to key points on her body, Jack appeared at her side, Noah's hand firmly in his. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "No one would think less of you." Sarah took his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt after such a short acquaintance. "I'm sure," she replied, "but I would like to ask one thing of you." "Name it." "Be there when I wake up," she said simply. "You and Noah, so I know I'm not alone in whatever comes next." Jack's expression softened. "We'll be there," he promised, "for as long as you want us to be." The treatment itself was less dramatic than its potential consequences might suggest. A series of injections administered at precise points along Sarah's spine, followed by electrical stimulation so gentle she barely felt it beneath the mild sedation Dr. Blackwood had provided. Throughout, Jack remained nearby, occasionally consulting with the doctor in hushed technical language that spoke to his deeper understanding of the procedure than he had previously revealed. As the sedation deepened, Sarah found her consciousness drifting, images flowing through her mind like water, herself dancing across the Kennedy Center stage, her father young and strong in military uniform, Jack bending to meet Noah at eye level, and finally a woman she somehow knew was Rebecca Thompson, playing a violin while surrounded by soft light. "Tell her it's time," Rebecca said in this dream vision, her voice melodic and warm. "Tell her to remember what it feels like." When Sarah woke, the laboratory was quiet, the lights dimmed to a gentle glow. She lay on a recovery bed, monitoring equipment beeping softly beside her. As promised, Jack sat nearby, Noah asleep against his shoulder, a children's book open but abandoned on his lap. "Hey," she said, her voice rough from dryness. Jack looked up immediately, a relief washing over his features. "Hey yourself," he replied carefully, shifting Noah to a more comfortable position without waking him. "How do you feel?" Sarah took inventory of her body, surprised by the clarity of sensation. "Different," she finally said. "More connected somehow, like parts of me that were silent or whispering again." Jack nodded as if this made perfect sense. The initial neural pathways reestablishing. It'll get stronger over time if the treatment takes hold. "When will we know if it worked?" Sarah asked, attempting to sit up. "Easy," Jack cautioned, moving to help her. "The physical changes come gradually. First increased sensation, then small, involuntary movements, eventually voluntary control." His hands were gentle as he adjusted her pillows. "But we've already got the first good sign. Your autonomic responses below the injury level are more active than they were yesterday." Sarah absorbed this information, the scientific reality somehow less important than the subjective experience of feeling more present in her entire body than she had since the accident. "I had a dream," she said suddenly, "about Rebecca. She said to tell you it's time, and to remember what it feels like." Jack went very still, his expression unreadable. "She said that those exact words, Vastus." Sarah nodded, puzzled by his reaction. "Is it significant?" "They're the words she said to me after my own treatment," Jack explained quietly. "When I was first learning to access the changes the protocols had created." He smiled slightly, shaking his head. "Seems she's still guiding the work even now." "She must have been remarkable," Sarah said softly. "She was." Jack's voice held admiration without the sharp edge of grief she might have expected. "And she would have liked you very much." Noah stirred against his father's shoulder, blinking awake with a child's immediate transition from sleep to full awareness. When he saw Sarah sitting up, his face broke into a delighted smile. "You're awake," he exclaimed. "Did it work? Can you dance again?" "Noah," Jack admonished gently, "remember what we discussed about patience." But Sarah didn't mind the boy's directness. "Not yet," she answered honestly, "but I can feel more than before. It's a start." Noah nodded, accepting this with a child's pragmatism. "Dad says healing is a journey, not a destination." "Your dad is very wise," Sarah replied, exchanging a smile with Jack over the boy's head. The door opened, admitting Robert and Dr. Blackwood. Her father looked exhausted but relieved, the burden of worry he had carried for months, visibly lightened as he saw her awake and alert. "The Meridian situation is contained," he reported. "FBI agents arrived an hour ago. Marcus and his team are in federal custody." He moved to Sarah's bedside, taking her hand in his. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Like myself," Sarah replied, "but a different version than before." Blackwood checked the monitoring equipment, nodding with satisfaction at the readings. The initial response is promising, she confirmed. Better than I expected, honestly. Your genetic compatibility with the treatment is even stronger than our models predicted. What happens now? Sarah asked, looking between the doctor and Jack. Rehabilitation, Jack answered, but not the kind you've been through before. This will be about learning to work with the changes as they develop, training your body to recognize and strengthen the new neural pathways. It's a long road, Dr. Blackwood cautioned. Months of work, possibly years before full recovery, if that's even possible. I'm not afraid of hard work, Sarah said, a hint of the dancer's discipline returning to her voice. And I'm not fixated on full recovery anymore. Whatever mobility I regain is a gift, not an entitlement. Jack smiled, recognizing his own philosophy in her words. One day at a time, he agreed, starting with getting you back to your cabin for some real rest. As arrangements were made to transfer her from the laboratory to her accommodations, Sarah found herself watching the easy interaction between Jack and Noah, the way they communicated with minimal words, the absolute trust evident in every exchange. Something had shifted in her during these few extraordinary days, not just the physical changes initiated by Rebecca's treatment, but a fundamental reorientation of how she saw herself and her future. Later settled in her cabin, with the night sounds of the mountains drifting through the open window, Sarah opened Rebecca's journal, the one Jack had given her for her own thoughts, and began to write, "Today I chose to become someone new. Not because I couldn't accept who I was, but because I glimpsed who I might become. The path forward isn't clear yet, but for the first time since the accident, I'm looking ahead rather than behind." Jack says healing isn't about fixing what's broken, but finding a new way forward. I think he's right. Whatever comes next, whether I dance again or find a different way to move through the world, I'm ready for the journey, and I'm not alone. As she wrote these final words, Sarah became aware of a sensation she had not experienced in 8 months, a faint but unmistakable tingling in her toes, like distant music beginning to play after a long silence. She set the journal aside and closed her eyes, focusing on the feeling, remembering what it was like to move to dance, to be fully present in her body. Remembering, as Rebecca had instructed, what it felt like. In the darkness of her cabin, with the mountains standing silent witness beyond her windows, Sarah Mitchell smiled. The first steps of her new journey lay ahead, and for the first time since the accident, she was eager to discover where they might lead.